Welcome back to A People's Guide to Publishing. I'm Joe Beal, the founder and CEO of Microcosm Publishing and Distribution. I'm also the author of A People's Guide to Publishing, which distills what I've learned from selling millions of books over the past 25 years.
I'm Ellie Blue. I'm the editorial and marketing director here at Microcosm. We are an independent mid-list publisher based in Portland, Oregon, and Cleveland, Ohio. We have over 700 books, over 25 employees, and we make about 40 new books every year. And we distribute thousands of titles from other publishers.
We started this podcast so that we can share what we've learned with newer publishers so that you can learn from our mistakes.
Or maybe you just want to understand the publishing industry.
This week, we bring you special guest to the pod, Jessie Kwak, and her pretty brand new book, From Big Idea to Book. Confusingly, the title of her book contains the word book.
It is a book about books. Welcome, Jessie.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks, guys. Thank you.
So what was it like writing a book about how to write a book? Did you feel any, imposter syndrome?
I totally felt imposter syndrome about that. One of the ways that I guess, got around the imposter syndrome of writing a book about how I write books is I interviewed a bunch of people, and so it's not just my experience, it's like a bunch of other authors from nonfiction and fiction and all sorts of stuff. So I found that with From Chaos to Creativity, my productivity system wasn't like something that worked for everybody, and so it's definitely the same with the writing process, where my writing process also doesn't work for everybody. So just like Chaos to Creativity, I was like, I will interview a bunch of other people and give people options. So that's how I got around it. I talked to the experts.
Right, and then you become one as such.
It's true, yeah.
And then and I think that's like so many great things. It's like when you talk to enough masters of their craft, you're like, oh, I get it now. Yeah. Like, here are the schools of thought, and now you can talk about it. And so what motivated this book?
What motivated it was I think just having all these conversations with friends who are writers, who are just writers love to talk about the writing process, and do you outline or do you not outline, or how do you use business or index cards, what do you do? And everyone's like, I use a spreadsheet, and we just love talking about our process. Sometimes it's more fun than writing, I guess.
Definitely.
And so
right, I feel like most of the writing books are like things you could be doing other than writing, such as reading this book.
Yes, exactly. So yeah, I guess that was kind of the inspiration. I like having those conversations too, so I thought it'd be a good opportunity to distill a lot of those different conversations and different ideas and cool things that I'd heard into something usable.
Right.
Was there anything that you learned in the course of researching that book that you've incorporated into your own writing process?
I think some of the stuff about revision that I learned, because I do really like the revision process, but I'm not super organized about it, and I really Rachel Herron, I think it was, who she talked to me a lot about her very detailed, print it all out and post-it notes, and her revision process is amazing, and so I definitely took in some of that.
Yeah, and that's what I liked about it a lot too, is it's so many writing books are just inspirational, and by that I mean they contain no actual information.
Yeah.
And so, but you were entirely pragmatic. You were what do people that want to do this need to know? What are people that have done this for years able to improve upon? Were you thinking about it that way?
Yeah, absolutely. I enjoy a good go write some words inspirational book, but I really wanted practical advice, and so as I was doing all these interviews, it was so I have a question for a friend. How do you do this?
Right.
And you're downplaying your own experience, but how many books have you written at this point?
I think I've written around 15.
Okay, so you've written more books than the average writer.
It is true.
I was saying more books than the average person, but more books than the average writer even. Yeah.
I haven't written 15 books. Have you?
You probably have. I probably have too, but it's but I've done it across 25 years.
That's a good point.
You've probably done it across
5 years.
Yeah.
We're not counting here. Okay.
I wrote my very first book in middle school, and I wrote a novel in high school.
Wait, do we count the middle school
I'm
one?
not counting those.
Okay.
I'm counting the published books. I'm not counting the 5 to 7 trunk novels, of which we shall not speak.
The juvenilia that will be found and published posthumously.
Right.
I realized the other day that I don't think I have copies of most of this, but the book I wrote in high school was part of like a I wrote it as like a free period that I designed my own my own course, I guess, in my senior year, because I kind of was running out of courses to take. It was a small school, and I realized my professor, who was like the lead on that course, probably has a copy of it still.
Okay, so it could see the light of day.
Burn it,
maybe against your will. Definitely against your will, but
It would take a lot of personal
first. Oh my
growth
gosh.
to be able to read something like that, I think.
Oh my
Yeah.
gosh, yeah.
and I guess
I
that's
never want to see it again.
that's the downside of fiction, is that like if you write it when you're 12, you can't just workshop it into functionality. You kind of have to throw it away and start over.
Yeah. You learn a lot from those early novels, but I think so I write sci-fi and fantasy, and the thing that I have learned from a lot of my friends who also write that is we all have that like trunk novel that we worked on for like 10 years, and really that's probably the novel to throw away and start and move on. Like I know people who are still working on that book, but you need to move on and probably do the next thing, because that was your learning book. And the other thing is because we all grew up reading like Lord of the Rings and Dune.
So there's some themes that you might find carryover.
Yeah, but that very first book is probably way overly ambitious, and it took me like throwing away those early ideas of like, I need to write this epic, and being like, I'm gonna write a novella and figure out how to tell a story in 20,000 words.
Yeah.
And I did that, and I was like, oh, I can write a book now. I learned it. I learned how to do it.
Right.
Let's take that to 70,000 words and try that. So, yeah.
Yeah, that was, I mean, it's the same in filmmaking. They're like, tell a story in 1 minute.
Yeah.
Then tell a story in 2 minutes.
Yeah.
And you're like, because that's the entire skill.
Yeah.
Whereas like most people would be like, my idea is so big it requires a feature, but it doesn't.
Right.
You know? It's
Yeah.
like, and so that was the thing where it's like, I learned by being like, telling the Terminator film in 1 minute. Like, you can absolutely do it. And then it's like, and I feel like writing any narrative is exactly the same way, because you're like, where do you expand? Where does it need character development or depth?
Yeah.
And so it's good that, and I feel like post notes on the wall is a way to do that, is a way to like map the story in a way that you don't when it's all like convoluted in your brain. So like, how did you identify the people that you wanted to talk to?
Let's see, I reached out to people who I knew had a different process than I did, or who I knew could fill in a gap in my knowledge somehow. Like, for example, I talked to Fonda Lee, who's written these amazingly epic fantasy books, and I was like, how do you research? How do you organize all that? Like, she's got these crazy large worlds. And so I was just like, Fonda, tell me, how do you do your research? Because I know she does just a ton of research on that. And in the same way, I talked to Curtis Chen, who's another sci-fi writer who's a friend of mine, and I asked him, like, okay, I know you go through the entire book without revising, and then you go back and edit it all, and I can't do that. That makes me crazy. So I was like, okay, Curtis, tell me about your process, because it's very different than mine. Also interviewed people who were nonfiction writers. I do write nonfiction, but it's not my primary thing. And people who write like poetry, people who write more essays and academic writing. And so it was really just kind of seeking out like, I don't know anything about this aspect. Let's find somebody who does. And I interviewed my fiction editor, Kira, because I was like, tell me about the editing process and all of the things that bug you about what I do. She was really great.
Right, nice.
So when you're reading books, do you like try to like figure out like what was the process that led to whatever you're reading? Like, do you troubleshoot it as you read?
Not really.
Okay.
No.
Sounds joyful.
I feel like I'm one of those rare writers that can still just read for fun and like turn off the writer brain. Unless it's a really bad book, in which case I just don't finish it.
That's a great skill.
Thanks for joining us once again.
Please send your questions to podcast@microcosmpublishing.com so we can answer them on future episodes.
And please give us 5 stars on iTunes and everywhere else that podcasts are reviewed.
You can find us on the internet at microcosm.pub,
On Twitter at Microcosm,
on Facebook at Microcosm Publishing,
on Instagram at Microcosm_pub.
and here in Portland, Oregon on North Williams Avenue.
Thank you so much.
Have a wonderful week.